Can you imagine that the most successful pilot in the history of F1 imposed his own design conditions to Ferrari? What if I told you that Lewis Hamilton is forcing the Scuderia to redesign his next car with his DNA? This is not a rumor, it is a reality, and what is happening within Maranello could redefine the future of F1. Lewis Hamilton did not come to Ferrari to close his career with nostalgia, he arrived to rewrite the story. And from the first moment he stepped on Maranello, he made it clear that it was not a decorative or symbolic signing. What few expected, even within Ferrari, was that the British would launch such a frontal warning to the team's heart so early. The 2026 car must reflect his DNA. Not as a diplomatic suggestion, not as an informal opinion, but as a direct demand. To understand the depth of this demand, you have to understand Ferrari's structural situation at this point of the season. The SF25 has proven to be a machine of extremes. Fast in classification, inconsistent in the race, and especially fragile under changing conditions. In this context, Hamilton has had to force his piloting style at parameters that are not his. The car is built around a philosophy that has historically favored Charles Leclerc. Lighter rear train, a natural survival trend, and an aggressive curve entry approach that rewards those who handle with immediate reflexes, not with tactical reading. Hamilton, on the contrary, is a master of the cleaning, of career management, of mechanical stability as a basis for strategic aggressiveness. His style demands a neutral car in behavior, predictable in traction, and with a frontal aerodynamic balance that allows him to plan curved attacks. And what he found in the SF25 was the entire opposite: medium speed instability, an erratic response to the brake weight, and a total absence of confidence in the rear under wet conditions. This explains why, from very early, he began working with Loic Serra, team manager, to redirect not only the development of the current car, but especially the concept of the next car. The phrase, "I need the next car to have some of my DNA," is much more than a desire, it is a turning point. Hamilton is not willing to repeat Mercedes's pattern in his last years, where his suggestions on the W13 and W14 were ignored until it was too late. Ferrari, which historically has been a team with a rigid technical hierarchy, is now facing an unpublished dilemma. If you give in to Hamilton's pressure, you could alter your technical and philosophical chain. But if he does not, he runs the risk of losing the most experienced and media pilot of the grill, just when he needs a leadership figure. This moment represents a structural tension between two visions: the traditional Ferrari that believes in the collective process, and the Ferrari that Hamilton proposes, where the pilot not only handles, but also designs, influences, directs. This unexpected demand is, in reality, a call to rethink how a winning car should be built in the modern era of Formula One. It is the story of a champion who no longer wants to adapt to the car. He wants the car to adapt to him. And if Ferrari wants to return to the top, he may have to listen more than he is used to. The 2025 season has not been kind to Lewis Hamilton, and the numbers reflect it without mercy. At this point in the championship, just before arriving in Belgium, the British is in the 6th position with 103 points, a figure that, for any other pilot, could be considered decent. But in the case of a 7-time world champion, that statistic is not only insufficient, but also deeply symbolic. It is the reflection of an adaptation process that has not been immediate or fluid or painless. Beyond its position in the championship, there is a data that weighs even more. Hamilton has not risen to the podium in any calendar race so far. Not once has been in the place they used to occupy almost inertia in the last decade. Its best result has been a 4th place, repeated on several occasions, but always with the feeling that something else was possible if only the car was willing to collaborate. Hamilton has had to alter fundamental elements of his driving. It has begun to apply a more aggressive approach in the passage by curve, releasing the brake before, playing with weight transfer in areas of low adhesion, and above all, synchronizing its style with the unstable aerodynamic behavior of the rear axle. All this while dealing with a power unit that does not provide margin for errors and with strategies that, at various times, have left it sold on the track. But the most critical factor is not what happened, but what is coming. The Belgian Grand Prix represents a fire test. Not only because of the technical conditions of the Spa-Francorchamps circuit, fast, unpredictable and highly demanding, but for what Ferrari has decided to implement for that race. A new rear suspension directly influenced by Hamilton's feedback. This update could be the key to unlock the potential that the British has demanding since he set foot in Maranello. But it could also be a break point if it doesn't work. Because if after all this technical and human effort, performance does not improve tangible, the narrative will change. What is described today as progressive adaptation will begin to read as sustained failure. And in a team like Ferrari, where the institutional pressure comes from all fronts of the press, the tifosi, the executive directorate, the margin of patience is as short as Monaco's escape zones. Hamilton knows it. That is why each race has become a battle against the clock. Every Friday is an opportunity to recover confidence. Every Saturday, a fight for perfection in a lap. And every Sunday, a surgical operation where a single mistake cannot be made. That is the real pressure. Not that of a contract, not that of the media, but to demonstrate that it can still be the architect of a revolution within the most demanding team in the history of motor racing. What Lewis Hamilton is demanding in Ferrari is not simply a technical change. It is an institutional disruption. Its unexpected demand has implications that go far beyond the design of a car. Threatens to modify the philosophical architecture of one of the most conservative and hierarchical teams in the history of Formula One. If it is allowed to be the conceptual architect of the SF26, the next Ferrari car will not only be a competition machine, it will be a statement of power. And that decision is not taken in a vacuum. Redefining the technical command chain to respond to the vision of a single pilot involves systemic risks. It means displacing engineers, altering methodologies, and assuming that the intuition and experience of a corridor, however legendary, will have priority over decades of standardized procedures. Never before in the Ferrari hybrid era has allowed a pilot to have so much control over the direction of development. But is it really so crazy? The results so far suggest that without a radical change, Ferrari will continue to be trapped in the eternal limbo between the second and third place. In recent years, Scuderia has accumulated strategic errors, reliability failures, and execution failures that have eroded their competitive credibility. In that context, the figure of Hamilton represents something that Ferrari has not had from Schumacher. A clear, dominant vision and without concessions on how a winning team should work. Therefore, this demand for own DNA in the next car is not just an act of arrogance. It is a calculated attempt to bring order and purpose to an environment that has been chronically reactive. Hamilton is not asking for cosmetic changes. It is demanding a structural revolution in the way Ferrari conceives the relationship between pilot and machine. And that raises an existential dilemma. If Ferrari accepts this new dynamic, runs the risk of generating internal tensions, especially with Charles Leclerc, who has been the technical reference of the team in recent years. Leclerc not only has a different driving style, but also a different perception of how a competitive car should be. An SF26 design for Hamilton could marginalize the needs of Leclerc, fracturing the internal unit of the equipment. But if Ferrari does not yield to the vision of the British, the risk is even greater, losing Hamilton. Not only as a pilot, but as a symbol of transformation. Because Hamilton, at 40, is not in Ferrari to wait. He wants immediate results, real influence, and the opportunity to close his career with a final symphony at the top of the podium. If you do not grant the tools to build that legacy, you will not hesitate to cut the relationship early. And let's not forget the psychological factor. This situation is not only molding Ferrari. He is redefining Hamilton. For the first time in his career, he no longer competes for titles. Compete for leaving a conceptual mark in sport. For becoming more than a pilot, in a philosophy's designer, a silent reformer of the traditional shield model. And if it succeeds, other teams could follow the example. We could be facing a paradigm shift, where the great champions are no longer simply executors of foreign engineering, but co-crest of the technical future of the F1. What is at stake is not a season, it is a model. The result of this demand will mark a precedent that could influence how relationships between pilots and shields operate in the next decade. And meanwhile, everything starts with a simple demand: I want the next car to have some of my DNA. The world of Formula One is accustomed to technical changes, aerodynamic revolutions, modifications and regulations. But what we are witnessing with Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari is not a simple mechanical evolution. It is an ideological pulse, a confrontation between the past and the future. Between a team that represents the purest tradition of motor racing and a pilot that embodies the constant transformation. And at that exact point where personal ambition is intended with institutional history, a question is born that goes beyond track performance. Is Ferrari ready to reinvent himself to be champion again? Are you prepared to allow one voice, Hamilton's, redraws the plans of your technical identity? This situation opens an immense range of scenarios. From a historical resurrection with a car that marks time and returns Ferrari to the throne, to an internal collapse due to unresolved tensions, cross egos and incompatible philosophies. At both ends there is drama, there is a legacy, there is history to write. I want to know what you think. Are Hamilton doing the right thing to demand control over the technical development of the next car? Or is it crossing a line that no pilot should cross? Do you think about a necessary commitment to break years of frustrations in Ferrari, or a risk that could fracture the internal stability of the equipment? What would you do if you were Frederic Vasseur? Leave me your answers in the comments.